Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Okay, let's start our new tutorial. This time, this guy teaches 11 how Godot. Probably some of them I'm skipping because basics, but we are doing top-down shooters. Let's see. I didn't find his assets this time. The other one's more clear, but I'm gonna try to do that while learning and watching the video.
In this video, you will learn the fundamentals of the Godot gaming engine. We will start with the program setup and its key concepts. From there, we will cover a broad range of topics like tile maps, animation players, lights, particle effects, shaders, and user interfaces. We will also cover more advanced topics like skeleton animations and pathfinding. If none of these words mean anything to you, don't worry, I'm going to explain everything from scratch. Either way, by the end of the video, you should have a strong understanding of how to create basically any 2D game in Godot. And you will also have a really good foundation to start with 3D games. Before we begin, a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, NordPass Business. When making a game, you will end up with a lot of data, and backing all of that up is a nightmare. You want to access your data from anywhere, from any operating system, it should be convenient, and it should be secure, both from hackers and from your house burning down. Especially security is a major concern. Having my accounts hacked would be a disaster for me, and if it can happen to a large organization like CD Projekt Red or Linus Tech Tips, it could happen to me, it could happen to you, or it could happen to your company. For example, I have a larger level called to actually create a couple of scenes and nodes. Specifically, I want to create 2 scenes and a bunch of nodes. Most importantly, I want to create a level scene. For now, this one is only going to contain some images, simply because that's the easiest thing to add. Besides that, I also want to create a player scene. This one also is just going to be a single picture for now. Finally, the last thing I want to do is to put the player scene inside of the level scene. That way, we can add a lot of stuff later on to the player, but still see the player itself inside of the level. Makes the organization much better. But for all of this, let's actually create some basic things in Godot. Here we are back in the editor, and since I want to create a 2D game, I want to work in a 2D workspace. We can select the different workspaces at the top. I want to work inside of 2D. And now we can see a 2D workspace. Let me zoom out a tiny bit. All of the gray area that you can see is the workspace. Although what you want to be aware of is that there is a blue rectangle. It's kind of hard to see on video, but if you have Godot open, this one is quite easy to see. This blue area is what's going to be visible to the player. This will effectively become the game window in just a bit. Or well, it already is, but this part is going to be visible. All of the stuff you can see right now is a scene. This scene at the moment doesn't have a name, which means in order to save a scene, we need to have some nodes inside. The nodes we can get from the panel out, you have the available. Instead, create in Godot. Effectively, it is literally just a point in a 2D space. You can actually see it already. If you look at the canvas, there's this red dot, and if I hover over it, you can see Node 2D. But this is literally what it is. It's just, well, a red dot. I can illustrate this a bit more because if you look on the right, we have transform. There we can set the position, the rotation, the scale, and the skew of this point. Rotation is going to be really easy to see. If I rotate the point, we get a rotated point. Although the player wouldn't see any of this. This point is only visible in the editor. And you might be asking, how is this helping for a game? And the answer is not very much, at least in terms of visibility. In Node2D, largely is used for organization. So you would add other nodes as children to this Node2D to organize your game. As a matter of fact, I want to rename this Node2D right away. I think level is going to be a much better name. Now that we have that, we have one scene with one node inside of it. And this scene I now want to save. This I can do either with Control or Command S, or by going to Scene and Save Scene. At the moment, we only have the graphics folder we imported earlier. Besides that, I want to create another folder that I'm going to call Scenes, all in lowercase letters. Inside.
Yeah, I didn't find that graphics. Let me check this again. I think I found it. Let's see. I will download this one. Okay, we can
Of this scenes
flush it now.
folder, I want to create another folder. I call this one levels, simply because later on we are going to have multiple of them. Inside of this levels folder, I am going to save this scene. And you can already tell that we have level.tscn. Godot always chooses the name of the first node of the scene, which means in my case, the first node that we added to the scene is called level, and this is going to be the name that we get by default. And this is the one you probably want.
Okay. I think I imported the right folders.
To use of the levels folder I now want to save. This I can do either with Control or Command S, or by going to Scene and Save Scene. At the moment, we only have the graphics folder we imported earlier. Besides that, I want to create another folder that I'm going to call Scenes, all in lowercase letters. Inside of this Scenes folder, I want to create another folder. I call this one Levels, simply because later on we are going to have multiple of them. Inside of this levels folder, I am going to save this scene. And you can already tell that we have level.tscn. Godot always chooses the name of the first node of the scene, which means in my case, the first node that we added to the scene is called level, and this is going to be the name that we get by default. And this is the one you probably want to use as well. So I want to save that. And now we have some minor changes. The most important change is that we now have a tab called Level. This is the scene. Inside of this scene, we have one node, a node 2D called Level. This node 2D doesn't do very much right now. It is literally just this point. We're going to do something more useful in just a bit. Besides that, we also have a new folder in our file system. We have scenes, there we have levels, and then we have level.tscn. Although, let me minimize all of this because we don't need it right now. Now that we have a basic setup, I want to add a picture to this scene. For that, I will need another node. To add another node, I have to go either to this plus symbol or press Ctrl or Command and A. In either case, you are going to find all of this with Ctrl or Command function. But click on it, we have now added another node. And before I continue, something you do want to pay attention to is we have our level node. This is the parent, and this parent has a child, which is the sprite 2D. This parent-child relationship is really important. I'll cover more of it in just a bit. For now, just keep in mind we have a parent and a child, and the parent influences the child. That being said, we still cannot see any kind of image inside of the scene. For that, we have to look on the right, because there we have the inspector. We still can transform the image. So like with Node2D, we have position, rotation, scale, and skew, but we don't care about any of them. Instead, what we care about are the additional options. We have texture, offset, animation, and region. Texture is what we have to add to get a picture. And if you click on the dropdown, you can add a whole bunch of stuff. Although I don't care about that because there's an easier way to add an image. All you have to do is look at the file system. For example, in there, I have icon.svg. This you have in every Godot project by default. And this image, I simply want to drag into the texture, and you can see there's this blue frame around the field. So if I drop it in there, we now have an image. This is the Godot logo. And we can see it because we have a sprite 2D. This image we can now influence. For example, I can simply drag it with my mouse and move it around. And let me zoom out a tiny bit so I can see the entire game window. I can simply move this image around and place it in a certain position. Besides that, if you look at the inspector, we have a few more things. There's offset, and then there, for example, we could use flip H. That's not visible, but you can use flip V for flip vertical. You can also give it an offset, but I don't really care about any of these options. Besides that, we have an animation, but that's a tiny bit more advanced, so I'm going to ignore it. And we have a region. If you enable that, the image disappears. However, what you can also do is edit region, then you get another dialog. And in here, you can select one region of the image. So let me just cut out a part of it and then click on close. And now you can see some slightly weird behavior. Don't worry about this too much because later on we're going to work with this in more detail and fix these weird artifacts. For now, I am simply going to disable the region, and then we are back to the basic image. Finally, you can use transform, and we could update the position, we can change the rotation, we could scale all of this, or we could skew it, like so. And you can also see inside of the inspector, whenever we change the default value, you can reset it by clicking on the return arrow thingy. There we go. With that, we have added one image. Before we continue, there are two important concepts that I want to cover. The first one is the coordinate system of the window that we are working in. Right now, the window has a position, the one you can see inside of the inspector. We have X of 629 and Y of 303. This means that we are 629 pixels from the left, and we are 303 pixels to the you are to incline computer graphics image a bit like that. So you kind of have to get used to it. If I click enter, these change the image. Let me zoom out a tiny bit. If I rotate this sprite 2D, level right now is the parent, which effectively means if you're changing the level, you would also affect the sprite 2D image. For example, if I change the rotation of the level, we are also rotating the image. Let me zoom out a tiny bit. If I rotate this level, we are rotating all of its children. However, if I simply click on sprite 2D and rotate this one, which means inside of the sprite, if I change the position back to 0 and 0, we are at the point of the level 2D node. The interaction between any of these nodes is super important to understand. We always have a parent and a child. And whatever happens to the parent is also going to be applied to the child. And whenever we are transforming the parent, we are also transforming the child. Which means whenever we are changing either the position, the rotation, the scale, or the skew of the parent, we also influence the child. This, by the way, would also work with multiple nodes. So if I have level selected sprite, side of graphics, there we have a car and we have main. This is the main part of the car. This I now want to drag into the texture, and there we can now see a car. This car we can also move around. Let me place it roughly here. Now, if I select the level again, I can rotate, and now I am rotating both the image of Godot and the car. What I can also do, and let me rename these sprite 2Ds so it's a bit clearer what they do. If I double click on the first sprite 2D, this one is going to be, let's call it logo. One would apply to scale or to skew. we always get multiple transformations. And of course, level would still apply to all of the children. You one parent node you absolutely want to practice. As a matter of fact, let's practice this right away. I want you guys to create another scene. This scene is going to have one parent node, which is going to be the player. This is going to be a node 2D. This node 2D is going to have a child, which is going to be, and sorry about that, but to create a new scene, all you have to do is pointing arrow, save the scene as player.ts with the player selected. I want to click on the plus icon and the folder inside of Bride. So A, the laser image, if I minimize the player folder, we are getting from projectiles. In there, we have a file called blue.png. This I want to drag on the texture, and there we go, we have the laser. What we can now do is arrange the laser in such a way that it looks a bit better, something like this. Later on, we're going to spawn these lasers dynamically, so we're going to lead this anyway, the position doesn't matter so much. I just wanted you guys to practice placing nodes inside of a scene. And alright, with that, we have two scenes. We have a player and we have a level. And while we're here, I want to change the node 2D level with the position back to 0 and 0. That just feels a bit cleaner. Also, I want to reset the rotation, and then I can move the sprite and the car so that they are somewhat visible. Now we have a couple of scenes. Next up, what I want to cover is how can we put one scene inside of another scene. Specifically, what I want to do is to place this player inside of the level. And for that, we have this symbol. It looks like a chain. If you hover over it, it says instantiate child scene. You can also get this with Control, Shift, and A. If I click on that, we get all of the scenes available in the game. And I want to get my player.tscn. If I click on Open, we simply get another node inside of our game. And this is very hard to see, but on top of the car, we now have the player. I can move him around actually. Essentially what happened, I had the car selected, and on this car, I added another scene. And the scene we have gotten from what we created earlier, the player. And since I had the car selected, this scene became a child of the car, which is not exactly what I want, so I'm going to click on the player and simply drag it on the level. That way, we have the logo with the car as a child, and then as a peer, we have the player. If we are changing the logo or the car, it's not going to affect the player, because the player is not a child of the logo or the car, but it is a child of another sprite. If, however, I add another kind of sprite, let me, with the player selected, click Ctrl A and add another sprite. I want to add the grenade. I can add it to a texture and move it, let's say roughly here. And also it's quite large, so I want to change the scale to 0.2. What is really important to understand now is whatever change we are making to this scene will show up inside of the level. So now you can see we have the grenade. We cannot select it from this level. Important to understand the texture and move it, let's say rough the player selected, Also, it's quite large, so I want to change the scale to 0.2. What is really important to understand now is whatever change we are making to this scene will show up inside of the level. So now you can see we have the grenade. We cannot select it from this level scene, but inside of the player we could make updates to it. With that system, you essentially can isolate the player, and all of the code for the player could be in here, and then the level is going to be separate from all of that. Later on, this kind of system will become incredibly important to organize your game. You will essentially have increasingly complex scenes, and you place them inside of other scenes. I think when you are getting started in Godot, this can be a tiny bit overwhelming. So I would...
Yeah. Actually, Bracky's video, I forgot the name. Bracky's video explained this really well.
very much recommend to just play around with the nodes and the scenes to make sure you understand what you are doing. As a matter of fact, let's do an exercise. I want you guys to create another scene. That scene is going to be for a bat. Once again, the parent node is going to be a node 2D. This node 2D is going to get one child, which is going to be a sprite of a bat. You can find the images for that inside of graphics and objects. On top of that, I want you guys to arrange them in such a way that so we can see it next to the player and try to figure
How does this feel?
back in Godot, I want to create another scene. For that, I click on the plus, or I can use Control or Command and N. Now we have an empty scene, and once again, I want to create a 2D scene. This I want to rename right away to bat. I also want to save the scene. Let's go up one folder, and let's create another folder. I suppose we could name this. The bed is going to, we have bed, pillow, we have pillow. I can also use like so. Just make whatever changes you like in here, whatever looks good. Now besides that, I want to add another pillow, which means with the bed selected, I want to add another sprite 2D, and this one is going to be for the small pillow. So I drag pillow small in there, and this I can drag, I don't know, let's say somewhere here. Just to keep the naming consistent, let me rename this one as well. Let's call it pillow small. And with that, we have the bed. Now we have to figure out how to get this bed scene into the level scene. And for that, I want to have the node 2D level selected and add another scene by clicking on the chain icon. And now we have another scene we can add, which is the bed. So if I now click on open, we have the bed. I can move it around like any other object, and this is looking really good. Before we finish, there are two things I want to cover. The first one is the naming convention in Godot. You might have already seen some minor bits of that. When I created the bed, I named the small pillow, pillow small with no separation, and each word started with a capital letter. This is called Pascal case. And that is what you use for basically any kind of node. Meaning there's no space between the words, and every word starts with a capital letter. However, for everything else in Godot, you basically always use snake case, which means everything is lowercase, and if there's a space, you use an underscore. Godot does this automatically actually. So when I'm saving any of the scenes, they are always written with lowercase letters. So we have bed all in lowercase letters, player in lowercase letters, level in lowercase letters, and so on. You don't have to follow this convention, but it would be a good idea to do so. And number two, you have to be aware of the drawing order. So for example, right now, the bed is on top of the player. I hope that's quite easy to see. If we move the bed over the player, you can't see the player anymore. That is because the bed node was added after the player node. If I move those two nodes around, so I click on the player and move it all the way to the bottom. Now we have the player on top of the bed. Basically what is going to happen is that you have a hierarchy that goes from the top to the bottom, or rather from the root outwards, which means level is all the way at the bottom, then we would have the logo, then we would have the bed, and then we would have the player. If a node is further down than another node, this node will be drawn on top of the other node. You can make some changes to this behavior, and we will cover that later on. But for now, just keep in mind the order of these nodes is quite important. So when you're placing all of these nodes, you want to be aware of two things. Number one is the parent-child relationship. So what node is part of what other. Now, before I finish this video, the last thing I want to do is to actually play the game. Obviously, right now, nothing is going to happen. But I do want to create a basic window so we can see something that the player would see. For that, you want to look at the top right. There we have a select scene thing. Now that we have, and now we can see an actual window of the game. It doesn't do anything right now, but at the very least we can see something. Now that we have covered the basics of nodes and scenes, we have to come to the next major topic, which is coding. Which in turn is what you're going to use for all of the interactivity inside of your game. Meaning if you ever want to rotate, move, or scale literally any object inside of the game, you would need to add some code. Let's talk about it. And there are two major issues we have to address. Number one is how to code in Godot. And number two is how to influence and support multiple languages. That being said, GDScript is most similar to Python. And the most similar in here is a bit deceptive. You could almost cross it out and simply say GDScript is Python, because the two languages are incredibly similar. Although that being said, if you know any programming language, in terms of data types, we have all of the common ones. We have integers, floats, booleans, strings, and dictionaries. There are no tuples, and lists have been replaced by arrays. Although in practice, you are not going to notice much of a difference. Number two, variables. There are two types of variables in Godot. We have normal variables and then constants. You could assign, though, for example, a string. Let's say string like so. Changing the data type dynamically is perfectly fine. That being said, though, what you can see further down here, you can tell a variable to only work with a specific kind of data. For example, the variable aString has a colon and then the string keyword. This tells Godot that this variable can only accept a string, nothing else. The same would also work with integers and booleans and all of the other data types as well. On top of that, if you are creating an array, like I'm doing down here, you can also tell GDScript to have specific kind of data types inside of this array. In this case, we have an array with integers, which means we have an array, and this one has 1, 2, 3, and 4. Simple integers. Next up, we have functions. And functions work basically like in Python. The major difference is that now you don't use the define keyword, instead you use func. After that, you are still specifying a function name, and then you can declare parameters. On top of that, you can also tell the parameters to have a certain kind of data type, in this case integers and strings. Besides that, you can also specify a return value for this function, which for this function would be a boolean. If you do not specify a return value, what is going to be returned will be void, which is essentially the absence of a value. Finally, just like in Python, if you want to assign a specific line of code to a function, you would use indentation. So in this example, this indentation tells us that the return statement belongs to the function. Once again, if you know Python, all of this should be really straightforward. Next up, we have flow, so how we can control the flow of your code. And for that one, we have if statements, we have while loops, we have for loops, along with comparison operators. So greater than, smaller than, greater equal than, all of these are there. You also have continue and break. Those are the major differences. If you got so far and you know basic Python, you should have a good grasp on GDScript. That being said, there's one really important topic I do have to address. Classes. The way you have to think about it is that whenever you create a script, you always have to add it to a node. And nodes are simply classes with default methods and attributes. Which means if we want to create a script, we would have to, for example, add it to a node 2D, and this script is to overwrite these default values. For example, if we change the position, we will place the node 2D in a new position. I'm going to add lots of examples on this later on. For now, just keep in mind that whenever you create a script, you add it to a node, and the node is a class with properties and methods. Now, before I jump into Godot, there are two more rather minor things I want to cover. Number one, there are lots of inbuilt functions that you will use. They all start with an underscore. For example, we have underscore ready, and this is run when a node is added to the tree, which basically means we're running this when the node is ready. Besides that, we have process, and this is run on every frame of the game. There are a few more, but those two are the most important ones. Besides that, you can also target other nodes from your node. This can be done in two ways. You could either use getNode, which is a function, and this is going to return a node. It wants one argument, which is a string of the node path. This isn't used very often, because the alternative looks like this. You have a $sign with the node path. This does the same thing, but is much more concise, which is why you're seeing this significantly more often. But alright, with that, we have covered a whole bunch of theory. Let's actually jump into Godot and let's play around with all of this. Here we are back in the scene we created earlier, and right now it's quite messy, so I want to clean things up a bit. I want to get rid of the player, so I'm just selecting it and then click on delete. Godot is going to ask me if I want to delete the player node, and I do want to do that. I also want to get rid of the bat, so delete, okay, and I also want to get rid of the car. Now, besides clicking on delete on your keyboard, you can also right click, and somewhere in there we have delete, all the way at the bottom. This is going to leave us only with the logo as the only node inside of the scene. For now, I want to return all of the values to their default state. So rotation should be 0 and position should also be 0 and 0. With that, we have a very basic scene. If you followed along so far, you don't have to clean up the scene on your end. I am just going to do it to keep things a bit more organized on my end. Now, to add a script to any kind of node, you have to use the symbol in the top left. This one here. It's a little scroll with a plus symbol. Before I am going to click on it, you have to be aware, depending on what node you have selected, if you click the button, you will attach a script to this particular node. Because remember, whenever you create a script, it always has to be attached to a node. In my case, I want to attach a script to the logo sprite. So I have this one selected, I click on the symbol, and then we get a new dialog. And in there, we can select a couple of things. First of all, the language, although right now we only have GDScript. Then we have inherits, and this is sprite2d. This is an option you basically never want to change. Then we have class name, you can ignore that. Then we get a template. For this one, you want to keep the default, don't worry too much about it. Then we have built-in script, you can ignore this one as well. And finally, we have the path. This is where we are going to save the script. In my case, I want to look at, let's say I want to go up one folder and save the script somewhere in here. I'm going to delete this later anyway, but for now I'm going to save it inside of scenes as logo.gd. If I now click on OK, we are going to the script view. If you want to go back to 2D, you click on the top on 2D. And this way you can change between 2D and script quite easily. On top of that, what you can also see now is that we have an icon next to the logo. We have the logo node, and on the right of it, we have a script. This is in the window really important too. Object from a sprite. That way, ready function, and we have a process function. I covered both of those earlier. Ready is essentially called whenever the node is ready. The node is ready, top right, I can see right. In there we have code. I can 400 and a 200 in there, game, there, function here. X, a bit further to the right every time, and I call this one the position. Since this is going to be a vector 2, I want to force a certain kind of vector with 0 and 0. Now this vector 2 has a couple of nice extra methods that we can work on. For example, if I add dot and 0, we are creating a vector with 0 and 0. Meaning this would be the same as a vector with 0 and 0. Besides that, I want to create a constant with the speed, because this day of ready, I want to update my affect the game of the sprites. Instead of updating position.x directly, I want to get my pos.x and then plus equal the speed, and then I can assign a whole new value to the position, which is just going to be pos. With that, I can run the code again, and we're going to get a similar result. That's looking pretty good. What you can also do is declare local variables inside of every function you have. For if hovering, so if I want to use did test rotation, we would get an error. And you can already see very aggressive. We have covered the most important basics of G-scale. Make sure, since this is something really important to understand, I do want to include an exercise at this point. I want you guys to create another variable called test scale. Make sure that the data type for this one is an integer and the default value should be 1. When the game is ready, use the variable to change the scale to 2. On top of that, while the game is running, continuously increase the scale by a very small amount. Choose whatever you like. Pause the video now and try to implement this one. Back in the code, I want to create another variable. For the name, I want to have test scale. And on top of that, I want to force a data type, which is going to be an integer, and the default value should be 1. With that, we have created a new variable. Next up, and set it to 2. The node scale integer scale should be the test scale. And now we are already getting an error. And once again, let me extend this window so we can see what's going on. We are trying to assign a value of type int to a variable that wants to have a vector 2. So this is not going to work. Scale always wants to have a vector 2. But that we can account for quite easily. All we have to do is get vector 2 and then pass in the test scale for x and y. And now the Godot debugger is happy again. With that, I can run the entire thing. And now the Godot logo is twice as large. Perfect. Which means with that, we can work inside. Of the process function to continuously increase the size. For that, I want to get the test scale again and increase it by a very small amount, let's say 0.01. Other than that, I want to get the scale property and set it to a new vector 2 with the test scale for both x and y. Let's try all of that. And now it's not growing. Let's instead change it to a 1. And now if I run this again, this is definitely working. The issue with adding 0.1 is that test scale is always going to be an integer. And when we add 0.1, we would get 1.1. And since the value for test scale always has to be an integer, Godot only takes the first value, which is going to be a 1. Anything after that is going to be ignored. If we had a float, this would work better, but in this case, the code is only going to work if we have full numbers, like 1, 2, and 3, and so on. But alright, with that, we have a couple of really important basics of GDScript. That being said, there's still quite a bit to go. A really important issue that... But now, let me minimize all of this and return back to the 2D scene. Right now, we can only influence the logo itself. But what if we wanted to go from level and then influence the logo? This we can't do right now. But this video is getting quite long, so let's do all of this in the next video. Let's continue talking about coding in Godot. Influence this to do is to give this besides the path. What you see most of the level scene, which is what I have right now. So I'm going to click on Open and then on Create. Now we can see we have 2 script symbols because both of these nodes have a script attached to them. We also have the scripts available in here, which is quite nice to switch between the two. Now, inside of the level, you can tell that we don't have the functions we had inside of logo, but that is only because of the preset I have selected. You can totally add func and ready, and then you get the same function. In there, I can print, let's say, level node is ready. And once I again, and let me close it again, there ready function works. Functions or process to logo.gd, and see what's happening anymore. Use control comment. Alternative, and then you're adding a comment. So I can get, for example, out. Both is fine. I tend to use Control or Command K because it's a bit faster. But choose whatever you.
I need a smaller keyboard for this.
You can see that we have the Godot symbol moving to the rotation of 0 degrees. That is looking like a good start. And this is what I talked about in the last video. Let me bring up the slide again. There towards the end, not to 90 degrees. Alternatively, what you are probably going to use much more often, again, we are getting the same result. As a matter of fact, you don't actually have to type it. What you can also do, if I get rid of it, you can simply select and click on the node you want to get, and then drag it into the code editor. And if you then drop it, you get the name of the node, or rather the path of the node. Same thing. This we can also target multiple times. For example, we can once again use func_process, then get the logo with $logo, and then the rotation in degrees. We could, for example, plus equal 0.1. If I now run the scene again, we get a very slow rotation. Let's increase the number by a fair amount. Let's say I want to increase it by 1 degree on every frame of the game. That is much more visible, and certainly it is working. To make it even more visible, let me change it to a 10. If I run this again, much more visible. Cool. That is what I wanted. So with that, we can now target other nodes. Next up, I want to work on the flow. Let's say I want to add an if statement that if the rotation is greater than 180 degrees, I want to change the rotation back to 0. For that, we will need an if statement. I want to get if, and then I can target the logo once again, and I want to get the rotation underscore degrees. And if that is greater than 180, then I want to get this same node, so I can just copy it. What is visible, but is quite hard to see, but let me run it again. And it is certainly working because the face of Godot is switching around. This isn't too visible, but the really important thing is the if statement. You also want you guys to update the position of the sprite. If it is greater than 1000, move it back to 0. And I am purely talking about the horizontal axis. Start on position 0 and to continuously move to the right. In the code, if I want to do something, say position exceeded. Statement set the position to. Let's explore what went wrong, and I would very much recommend you to investigate this yourself. Find all of, and well, the issue is inside of the logo GD script, we are storing the position inside of this vector that I called pos. And we are updating this pos vector, and then we are setting the position to the pos. The problem essentially is inside of level. When we are updating position.x and set it to 0, we are actually setting the position of this sprite to 0. However, what is happening right after, inside of logo.gd, we are setting another position, the one we have specified here. Because of that, we are overwriting what we have done inside of this line. Now, to fix that, all we have to do is to change the position to pos. That way, we don't update the position itself. Instead, we are updating this pos vector, which is responsible for the position. Which means now this should be working. And there we go. This is looking much better. It keeps on working, perfect. Basically, we want to control the position with the pos variable, which is a vector too. And when you target a node from another node, in this case the level, you can target any of the attributes. They can either be some of the inbuilt ones, like position, or it can be one of the attributes that you have created, like pos. You can target both just fine. Finally, before I finish this video, let's have a look at the for loop. And for that, we're going to need an array. And let's create one in the entire scope of the class. I want to create var test array. And this is going to be an array that is only accepting, let's say, a string for the data inside. For an array, you need square brackets, and since we only have strings inside, we will need either single or double quotation marks. Usually what you see in Godot are double quotation marks, but single ones work just as well. I'm going to add some random words. It doesn't really matter what you add in here, and stuff. Also, let's extend the entire thing so we can see all of it. Cool. Now we have an array full of strings. If you want to look at every single value individually, you would need a for loop, which basically means we want for.
I didn't understand why this doesn't work, but interesting. This works well, right?
And then we need a name for the value. If, for example, I only wanted to print the first value, I can go print the test array, and then the index 0. Once again, if I run all of this, we get test, which is the first value inside. It's called delta time. At the bottom of the tab, and delta. A common previous this speed at 1. And to understand what that means, we have to cover a bit of theory. Let me open the slides. When we are moving objects in the game, the speed of them is determined by how fast, and when we might get different frame rates. And this can be a massive. This is in pixels. This is determined by your computer. For example, on my computer, really good have. So this can also, for example, on this slowest possible movement, depend times effects are more difficult to render than, and sometimes 5 seconds divided by 60. All we have to do is to multiply the movement with delta time. It's actually is what for that. Our frame rate frames. The way to visualize this is this 0.08, so we are literally left with 10. This counts by the speed right now is whenever you have regardless of the frame rate. Now, in my case, I can't easily control the frame rate, so this is a bit difficult to visualize. But trust me, this is a very easy thing to implement and really important. Fixing that, pause the video now and try to implement this one. Use that. The debugger is now a bit less unhappy. We only have one issue left. Fixing that one is going to be your exercise. I want you guys to use delta. We have two things. We are updating the rotation, and then we are setting the position. We only need to use delta for one of them. When we are updating the rotation, this one we want to multiply with delta. And now remember, the rotation is going to be incredibly slow because delta is such a low number, 60. That is more visible. And once again, this rotation is now frame rate independent. We do not need to apply delta for this if statement where we are updating the position, because this one is not a change in movement. We are simply setting the position of the frame to x being 0. We are not continuously updating the movement. We are only doing this once. Because of that, we are not going to need delta time. You have to think about the really important part for any game is player input. So what it's doing is it allows you to capture different kinds of inputs, and that will make it easy to implement project, and there we have project settings. If you look at the top, there we have an input map, and right now it's completely empty. For that, we have to create a new action first of all. This would be a category that can capture different kinds of inputs. For example, the one we could start with is left. Now we have one action called left, and this action should have a couple of keys buttons. So most of the time you don't go through the list. Instead you click on listening for input, and then you press the button on the keyboard that you want. So in my case, I want to have the left. We can click on OK, but access the input map. And this is going to happen with code. So let's say inside of the level, I want to open the code, if anything, and implementation there. And for that, Godot is amazing, because if you hold Control or Command and you click on input, then Godot is opening the inbuilt documentation and simply checking if on input, I want to run a method. So I add various actions. Godot has a couple of predefined ones, although all the way at the top, we have the one that we created, which is called left. And now whenever we are pressing the button, or rather whenever the player is pressing the button, this is going to return a Boolean that says either true or false. True if the button is pressed, and false if it isn't pressed. Which means we can simply print all of this, and we should see either true or false. Let me run the code, and now I get false because the key isn't pressed. But if I click on the left key or on A, we're getting true, which means we can register for the key press. Cool, this one is working really well. In case you're wondering, if I return to input and look at the method we have just used, there we go, is action pressed. What's the difference between is action pressed and is action just pressed? For that, you can simply click on the method and then you get the entry inside of the documentation. The difference basically is that is action just pressed is only checking the action of pressing the button, which means if the player is pressing a button and holding the button down, we are only getting true once. Whereas is action pressed, we are checking the button being pressed down. So if the player holds down the button, we keep on getting some kind of output. The difference is somewhat subtle, but it can be quite important. If you play around with this, it should become fairly straightforward. And with that, we have the basics of keyboard input. All we have to do now is to expand all of this, and then we can move the player, at least in a very rudimentary sense. First of all, inside of project settings, I want to keep on working inside of the input map. First of all, I want to add a few new actions. Besides left, I also want to have right, I want to have up, and I want to have down. This is going to cover the keys to move the player. On top of that, I want to have a primary action. This would be the left mouse button or the spacebar to shoot a laser later on. Although there's still quite a bit of ground to cover before we reach that stage. But first of all, we have to add a few keys to all of these actions. And I would recommend that you are doing this yourself, but I'm going to add a proper exercise later. Although this shouldn't be too hard, so let's just go through it. For the right action, I want to press right on the keyboard, or I want to press E on the keyboard. Next up, for up, I want to press up on the keyboard, click on OK, or I want to press W on the keyboard and click OK. For down, I want to press down on the keyboard, and I want to press S on the keyboard. With that, we can move around. Next up, we need primary action. This one is triggered either by the spacebar. This one is easy to capture. All I have to do is press space, and there we go. We have the spacebar. Capturing the mouse buttons is a tiny bit more difficult because I couldn't just click in there. Oh well, I actually can, but I didn't know I could do that. So instead of doing that, you could simply look at mouse buttons, and there's left mouse button, right mouse button,
He's
middle
learning
mouse
by
button, and so on.
teaching. Nice.
I want to get
Best
the left
type
mouse
of
button.
teacher.
So I click on OK, and there we go. Now we have a ton of keys that we can work with. Now back in the code, let me move back to the editor. I don't want to move this sprite that we have created earlier. Instead, I want to move the player. And for that, I want to clean things up a bit. I don't need the laser image anymore, so I'm going to get rid of this. And this sprite 2D for the grenade, we can also get rid of. That way, we are left only with the player image. On top of that, inside of the level, I want to attach an instance of this player. So with level selected, I'm going to click on the chain symbol and then attach the player. And let's just move him somewhere in there so we see what's going on. Now with that, I want to give the player a script. And the script is going to go on the player node 2D, not on the image itself. The reason for that is later on, this node is going to get a whole bunch more children, and we want to move all of them together. For that, we have to move only the parent node, and since we apply the same transform to all of the children, we are moving all of them if we move the parent, which means the player is going to get a script. Once again, we get the dialog to create a new script, and the one thing I should have mentioned earlier, when you click on template, you either have default, and this one includes the ready function and process, whereas if you have empty, it doesn't include anything except the extend statement for the inheritance. I'm going to go with empty because I like to start clean, but you can choose whatever you want. On top of that, for the path, I want to save the script, so player.gd, in the same folder where I have the scene for the player, which I already have. So I can click on open and create. There we go. Now the player has a script. To check for input, once again, we will need the process function. And first of all in there, I want to get the input. And this I can do in a couple of different ways. Although there's one method that is the most succinct and the easiest to use. Let's have a look at input, because in there, if I scroll all the way up, we have a whole bunch of methods that we can use. And let me extend this window a bit so we can see things better. The method that is going to be most useful for us is called getVector. If I click on that, we get a bit more detail. This method is designed for top-down movement. Basically, what it wants is 4 different actions. One for negative x, or left, then positive x, so right.
Yeah,
after that, negative y and positive y.
I use this for the Vampire Survival tutorial game. You can put left, right, all of them in the one vector.
Which would be up and down. We could also add a dead zone, but we don't need to, so I'm going to ignore it. Once we have these 4 actions, Godot is going to return a vector, and this vector is going to give us the movement. For example, if the user only pressed the -x action, we will get a vector that points at -1 and 0. So we are just going to the left, no up or down. If you just read these things on your own, I think especially at this stage, this is probably a bit confusing. And when you get started with coding, reading documentation can be a bit difficult. But if you have a bit of practice, all of this should become quite easy to understand. But, well, it does take some time to get used to it. Anyway though, I want to minimize this window and work inside of the player. To get the input, I first of all want to create a new variable. Let's call it var direction. And this direction I get with input and then dot get underscore vector. That is the method we just looked at. This one, and now we have to go through the different actions for the 4 directions. We have to start with -x, which is a fancy way of saying left. Then we need +x, which is just right. Then we need -y, which is up. And finally, we needed +y, which is down. Once we have all of those, Godot stops complaining, and we are getting a vector. To make sure this is working, let's print what we are actually getting from direction. And before I run all of this inside of the level, I want to comment out the print statement, so we only see the output for the direction, and it's not going to get too confusing. Let's run all of this, and now by default we get 0 and 0, because I'm not pressing anything. However, if I press the left key, or I press A, then we get -1, because this is now telling the game that we want to move in the left direction. I can also press up, or down, or right, or 2 keys combined. Then we get a slightly less pretty vector, but it certainly works. The same would also work with WASD. We get pretty much the same output. This is looking really good. Which means with all of that, we can get the input, and then we just have to use it to move the player. To actually move the player then, we have to target the position. And once again, I think for this, it's easiest to have the inspector open, because what we ultimately want to change is the position of the node 2D. And this we can target with the position, which by itself is going to be a vector. All we have to do is position plus equal the direction, and then times some kind of speed. Let's say 200. On top of that, what I covered in the last part, do not forget delta whenever you move anything continuously. Now, once we have all of that, I can run the code again, and now we can move the player around. It's quite slow, but it definitely works. So I am quite happy with that. It might be a good idea to increase the speed to, let's say, 500. And now we can move much faster. This is feeling better. But this would be the basics of movement. Later on, we are going to change that to account for physics, but for now, this is working just fine. That being said, I do want to add one more thing though, because right now we are just able to move. The player wouldn't have any way to input a shooting mechanic. For that, I want to add a bit more code. Let's call it the laser shooting input. I want to check if the player is pressing the primary input. I need an if statement, and this is going to look very similar compared to what we have done inside of this print statement. I want to check the input and then is action pressed, which means inside of the player, I want to get the input and then is action. For this one, you could use either is action just pressed or is action pressed. Later on, we are going to have a timer to delay the laser shooting anyway, so the difference here is negligible. But the action I'm looking for is primary action. If that is the case, for now, I simply want to print, let's say, shoot laser. And now I can run the game again. Now, if I click with my mouse button, I get shoot laser, or if I press space, we're also getting shoot laser. So this is working just fine. And that is covering all of the basics of keyboard input. All we have to do now is do an exercise, and then we are done. I want you guys to create another action in the input map and call it secondary action. The associated keys are control, left control to be more specific, but it doesn't really matter, and also the right mouse button. If that action is triggered, print shoot grenade, and all of the code should be inside of the player right below the laser. Pause the video now and try to figure this one out. First of all, I have to update the input map. This I'm doing inside of project, input map, piece. After that, I can put is action. The specifics of what I print really don't matter. We're going to change this later on quite a bit anyway, but for now, this should be all we need. Let's try. And if I right click, we get shoot grenade. If I press on control, we also get shoot grenade. If I press space, we still get shoot laser, and we can also still move around. So all of this is coming together quite nicely. Perfect. Before we continue, I want to cover some more minor topics. Specifically, I want to talk more on nodes. Even more specifically, I want to talk about how to interact with nodes via code. We have already seen some of that. To bring up an earlier slide, you can target nodes in two ways, either with getNode or with a $sign. The $node one is the much better one because it's just more concise. We are going to explore this further, specifically how to target different nodes that are a bit more nested. So if a node has more parent nodes, or specialize, is that once you capture a node inside of your code, you can access what's happening. Look at the level, I can open the code in the direction and the position. Some attributes. We could do the same thing with the player. However, with this sprite 2D selected, I want to click on Ctrl D to duplicate it, and then set the second sprite 2D as the child of this sprite 2D. So we have another sprite 2D with another child. And this process I'm going to do a few more times, but it's a bit easier to understand what's going on. Let me just drag it somewhere down there and fit off inside of the output, target, and then a sprite2d somewhere which it might actually become. You can give this target node a unique name. To give it one, you have to right click on it and then access as a unique name. If I click on that, we have a percentage sign on the right side of it. What this one means, if I now delete this path and drag the target node again in there with some unique ID. Basically what this one is doing is it gives this target a unique name that you can access anywhere inside of the scene.
What happens
example,
if you
if I
do
wanted to
all
work
the nodes are unique? Is there anything?
inside of the logo.
There is no blockage there.
Where we are simply moving a sprite right now, I could also target.
So in level I can put them all unique and access them by their name. But if I put unique here, I can't access in here.
Target the same.
At least the other guy. GD quest tutorial told it worked like
Same
that.
node. I can simply, let's say, I want to have the percentage sign, then the target. That would give us the entire node. And on that, I could, for example, get the position. If I spell this correctly, this would also help a lot. And now, if I run all of this again, we are getting a position, which is 0 and 0. With this kind of setup, it's much easier to work in larger scenes. Although don't overuse it. If you add this kind of thing to every single node, the system kind of becomes pointless. So use this sparingly, but in certain situations, this can be incredibly useful. That being said, in this case, this is not useful at all. Because of that, I want to delete all of the stuff we have just created. So I'm going to delete all of these nodes and get rid of the the print statement inside of logo GD and level GD, because the target node doesn't exist anymore. The last thing I want to cover is what if you have a child node like this logo2d with a script and you want to access something inside of the parent, in this case, the level. For example, right now inside of our level, we have a test array with a couple of entries. And I want to access this from inside of the logo, which has this script attached to it. That you can also do quite easily. All you have to do is, well, you basically just have to drag the node into the code and then you see what's going to happen. We get a double dot. This is the sign in Godot to get the parent node. And on that, we can target certain things. In this case, inside of level GD, we have a test array. This is just a property of this node, so I can get test array. All of this I want to print so we can actually see it. Also, let me get rid of any other print statement. For example, here we have test array 0 that we are printing, which would be confusing right now. Inside of the player, we are only printing if we are shooting the laser or the grenade, so those are fine. Now, if I run the code again, we get the test array inside of the output and code ones. But you can totally create your own function. Simply type func and then type a custom name. For example, test func, test function dot. The same thing we have done up here. The quotation marks you will need when you use the dot dots. If I remove them, we would get some weird output. So when you use a parent node, you would need the quotation marks. Although other than that, we can simply call the test function. And since we now want to call the function, don't forget the parentheses at the end. With that, I can run all of this, and there we get, this is the position, we could change the rotation, we could change the test array, whatever we want to do. And this is something really important that you have to understand. So let me emphasize it. One of the most important aspects of Godot. Later on, we will also work across multiple scenes. There are quite a few tools to make all of this work, but I really want to emphasize that making nodes communicate with each other is a fundamental part of Godot, and you have to understand how this works. I suppose for now this isn't too difficult, but later on we're going to expand on this system quite a bit. So definitely play around with this and make sure you can access different nodes and change their properties from anywhere inside of a scene. At this point, you should be able to do just that. For this section, we are going to have a slightly different exercise. It's much more open-ended. I want you guys to play around with the nodes and try to change and update other nodes. Basically, make sure that you see what you can. So incredibly important for any kind of movement. To illustrate why, I want to cover some problems we have right now. So far, we are currently just moving images, which is fine, but also limited, because an image cannot collide or slide along a surface. Essentially, they don't have any physical properties, which would be a massive issue for a game. To fix that, we have to use collision bodies and physics bodies. Those are Godot nodes that can work with all of that. And the best way to approach all of that is to look at this straight in Godot. Here we are back in the editor, and I want to create a few more nodes. Let's get rid of Sprite2D, and here we can see all of the nodes. In a very broad sense, you have 4 different types of nodes. You have the blue ones, those are nodes for a 2D game. Then you have control nodes, those are nodes for the layout. We'll cover those to some extent later. But this is quite a large topic, so this is going to be a separate video. We also have 3D nodes, and then we have a lot of general nodes. For example, there's a timer. We cover that quite soon, actually. For now, I want to work inside of Node 2D, because we're making a 2D game. In there, we have lots more nodes, but at the top, we have Collision Object 2D. If I expand that, we get Physics Body 2D, and we get an Area 2D node. We can also expand Physics Body 2D, and there we have a Static Body 2D, a Character Body 2D, and a Rigid Body 2D. We can expand things a bit more, but we don't need to. These 4 nodes are incredibly important, so I want to talk about them in quite some detail. There are two major parts for every one of these nodes that you have to be aware of. Number one is what they do, and number two is how you would move them. Because now that we are working with physics, the movement gets a bit different. Most of the work is done by Godot, so we're not going to do anything complicated. The easiest node that we can talk about is area 2D. This is just an area that can check if another body has entered. This area you can also move by changing the position, which is quite easily done. A good example for this one would be if the player is entering a house. The house would be an area 2D, and this area 2D can check if a body has entered. Besides that, when we are creating the lasers later on, those will also have areas attached to them. And those areas are going to check if the laser is colliding with an enemy or a wall or an obstacle or something like that.
Yeah. There's a small issue in the stream PC. Now it should be fixed.
Next up, we have a static body 2D. The name areas are going to can check, which is quite easily done. A good example for this one would be if the player is entering a house. The house would be an area 2D, and this area 2D can check if a body has entered. Besides that, when we are creating the lasers later on, those will also have areas attached to them. And those areas are going to check if the laser is colliding with an enemy or a wall or an obstacle or something like that. Next up, we have a static body 2D. The name gives you a pretty good idea of what this one is doing. Static. If you want to move them, later on, other bodies can collide with them, but they cannot move themselves. They are the easiest kind of collidable body we have. Next up, we have a rigid body 2D. This is a body that moves purely via physical forces. Think of it like a cannonball. If you want to move them, all you have to do is set a velocity when you create them, and then the body is going to move on its own. We are not going to use this very much, but when we are going to create the grenade later on, we are going to use a rigid body 2D. Because for the grenade, all we have to do is set a velocity, and then it's going to move on its own. Finally, the most important body is character body 2D. This is a moving body controlled by code, and you are moving this via inbuilt methods. There are a couple depending on what kind of collision you want. I'll cover this in just a bit. But essentially, any entity controlled by code is going to be a character body 2D. This includes the player and all of the enemies. And when I say an entity controlled by code, I mean some complex movement. For example, the player has a complex movement of a direction that we get via input, and then a certain kind of speed. The enemies would also have some slightly more complex movement. Although for now, I covered a whole bunch of theory, so let's return to the editor and let's do something more practical. Back in Godot, I want to create a couple of physics bodies. And let's start with the easiest one. I want to update the bat. Because right now we have a Node2D as the parent, and then we have 3 sprites attached. To update this, I want to change the parent node. So this Node2D, I want to turn into a static body 2D. For that, I have to right click on it, and there we have change type. Right now we have a Node2D. This is not what I want. Instead, I want to go to Node2D, collision object, and physics body 2D, and there we have a static body 2D. Alternatively, you could also simply type in static body 2D and you would get the same result. So now we get a static body 2D. You can see that the icon has changed, but so far not much has happened. The other thing we got is a warning symbol, which is saying that this node has no shape, so it cannot collide or interact with other objects. Consider adding a collision shape 2D or a collision polygon 2D as a child to define its shape. What that means is that whenever you have any physics body, you have to also attach a shape, because right now this collision body doesn't know what its actual body is. Or more specifically, it doesn't know what the shape of its body is. To fix that, we need to add another node, which means I click on the plus, and what we need is a collision shape 2D or a collision polygon 2D. A collision shape 2D is giving you predefined shapes, whereas a collision polygon 2D allows you to create more flexible arrangements. For now, though, since the bat is a really easy shape, I want to have a collision shape 2D. If I now click on enter, we create another child, which is a collision shape 2D. Although now we're getting another warning, which is saying that a shape must be provided for collision shape 2D to function. To add this shape, we have to look at the right. There, inside of the inspector, we have a shape property. Right now it says empty, but if I click on it, we can select a set of shapes. The one I want to look at is a new rectangle shape 2D. If I click on that, we get a small blue area. On top of that, which is perfect. We can move around, which I called back. I want to select it. Fits the entire. Now is simply the image. Also, what you can do, you are vertical or horizontal is fine. Basically, what you want to have as the actual physical body. Something like this looks pretty good. In here, we don't have the bat right now. So with the level selected, I want to click on the chain symbol to add a child scene and add the scene and add the bat. And let's move it here-ish. You can still see we have the blue outline. In the game though, this is not going to be visible. This blue area is purely for debugging purposes, so you know what the actual collision shape is. That being said though, if I run the game again, I can move the player, but we have no collision. The reason for that is that the bat has a collision shape, but the player is just an image, and images cannot collide. So we have to update the player, and then we have an actual collision. Which means, once again, we have to update a node. In this case, the player is also a node 2D, but this is not what I want anymore. So I right click on it, and I want to change the type. I don't want a node 2D, instead I want to have a character body 2D. With that, once again, we get a different symbol and a warning icon. This body has no shape. To fix that, I want to add another node, which is going to be a collision shape 2D. I have this one in my recent tab. I can click on create. Now we get another warning that there's no shape for this body. And for that, we have to look on the right where we can add a shape. Now for this one, the shape is getting a bit more complicated because the player itself doesn't have a regular shape. Although we can simplify things a bit. If you look at the player and squint a bit, you get more or less a round shape, which is what I want to go with. Which means for the shape, I want to have a circle shape 2D. This is now giving me a circle, and this circle I want to expand a bit to something like this. And on top of that, I want to get the player image and move it so it's roughly in the middle. I would recommend to always keep the collision shape around the center. So right now, this character body has a center around the position 0 and 0. And this 0 and 0 I don't want to change. So I keep the collision shape around this position and then move the player to align with it. With that, we have a collision shape. This sort of setup, where you have a character body 2D, an image, and then a collision shape, is incredibly common in Godot. Basically any kind of game for any scene is starting with something like that. That way you get collisions, you get movement, and you can see what's going on via the image. And if you don't have movement, like for the bat, you would have a static body 2D, then an image or multiple images, and then another collision shape. So this kind of setup is something you really have to understand. That being said, right now, if I run the code again, I still don't get any kind of collision. So something still isn't working. The reason why that is, if I look at the player and open the code, we get one problem, and this is we are extending a node 2D. This is because earlier on we created a node 2D and attached all of the code, but we changed the node. Now we don't have a node 2D anymore, instead we have a character body 2D. So we don't want to extend a node 2D, we want to extend a character body 2D. Now that we have that, I can run the code again, and we still don't get a collision. That's because
He's
we
trolling
are
us, dude.
right now updating the position, which is not how you are supposed to use a character body 2D. As a consequence, let me get rid of this position. Also, I want to extend the code window so we can see a bit better what's going on. To update a character body 2D, you want to use a specific method that is called move and slide. You don't have to add any kind of argument, this one works by itself. However, what you also have to do is to update a velocity. This velocity is a property of a character body 2D. You always have it. But once you overwrite it, move and slide is picking it up to move the body. So in our case, we want to set the velocity, which is going to be a vector 2D, to the direction and then multiply it with some kind of speed. Let's say for now, I want to go with 500. Now if I run the game again, we are getting a collision. And this is feeling much better. Let's talk about this setup a bit more. And the best way to think about it is to look at all of this inside of the documentation. For that, I am going to hold Control or Command and click on Character Body 2D. If I do that, I get the documentation for a Character Body 2D. And in there, you have a lot of information. I would recommend you to read this in your own time, but for now it's not too important. What is really important instead is the velocity. This is what I want to first look at. If I click on it, we get the current velocity in pixels per second, used and modified during calls to move and slide. On top of that, we also see that the default is vector 2, 0, and 0, which means the default velocity for character body 2D is no movement at all. And once we're changing the vector 2D of the velocity to something else, move and slide is going to move this body in that direction. Speaking of which, let's click on move and slide. This one moves the body based on velocity, the property we just looked at. And if the body collides with another, it will slide along that body. You can define a floor, but in our case, since we have a top-down game, we don't need to do that. There's a bit more information, but for now, this isn't too important. I guess one more thing that we could look at is that this method returns true if the body has collided, and otherwise it returns false, which can be useful information, but for this tutorial, we're not going to use it. With that, let me scroll all the way to the top. And there we can see another way to move a physics body 2D, which is called move and collide. This one has some slightly different collision behavior, but it's ultimately quite similar to move and slide. I am not going to cover this one for this tutorial because we don't need it. Move and slide is what you're going to use most of the time. But just keep in mind, there are two different ones. Also, if you scroll down a bit further, you can see there are lots more methods that you could work with. For example, you could tell if the body is on the floor, is on a wall, is on a ceiling, stuff like that. It can be super useful. Especially if you create a platformer, this is going to be incredibly helpful. But for now, we don't need it. Since we are done with this one, I want to close this entry inside of the documentation, which you can do either by right-click and close or Control and W. And let me close the input one as well. We don't need this one either. So with that, back inside of the player, we are updating our velocity and we are using move and slide to move this body. Now that we have that, let me minimize the code and return to the level scene. First of all, I want to clean things up. We don't need this logo anymore, which means I can click on delete and get rid of it. On top of that, inside of scenes, we have logo GD. This script I also want to get rid of. Godot is going to complain that we are using this script inside of a scene, and I'm okay with that. So now we have the levels, we have level GD and level scene, we have the object, which is the bed, and we have the player. That is feeling like a much cleaner setup. Also, if you look at the debugger, now it's complaining again. So let's have a look. We have, once again, the parameter delta is never used in the function process. If I double click on that, we get now process delta is not being used anymore. Let me minimize the debugger actually. This is something I should have covered as well. Move and slide uses the velocity to move the character body, and it automatically includes delta. Because of that, we don't have to use delta in this process function at all. To indicate that we're not using it, Godot wants us to use an underscore at the beginning. That way, this delta is still available, but we're not using it. So now, if I run the code again, the debugger is happy again. Although now we are getting an error because we got rid of the logo, so the level scene has quite a bit of code that is not relevant anymore. Inside of the ready function, we are using the logo, and that's the only thing we are doing in there. So let's get rid of all of that. Same with process actually, we can get rid of all of this as well. With that, I can run the game again, and now we have a much simpler setup. And this is still feeling good though. I guess while we are here, we can also get rid of the test function and the test array. That way, everything is nice and tidy. All we have to do now is add an exercise, and then we are done with the video. And for the exercise, we have quite a bit. I want you guys to create another scene that is going to be a static object. The specifics here don't matter too much. Basically, go through the graphics folder and look at the objects and just see what you want to create as a static object. In the end, it should look somewhat similar compared to the bed we made earlier. Besides that, I want you guys to create a moving scene with a drone, and this one should move constantly to the right. You can find the drone under the enemies folder inside of graphics. Pause the video now and try to implement.
Allah Allah. Tövbe estağfurullah.
Both of these things. Parent node is going to be a static body X, and in there we have a whole bunch of stuff. I want to look at objects, and for example, what we could be looking at is, let's say there's a billboard. This we could work with. And this I want to drag into the texture for the sprite 2D, and there we have a billboard. That's a pretty good start. Next up, I want to add a collision shape. There we have a collision shape. And now this one needs a shape. The shape we create inside of the inspector. And for this one, I think a rectangle would be the best shape. And this shape I now have to extend a bit. Remember here, holding down Alt lets you scale the thing in either axis. And also, let me move this. You can use the arrow keys to move it by 1 pixel at a time. I think this one is looking good. Obviously, play around with this as much as you like. You can fine-tune things a lot in here. Cool, with that, we have a billboard. Finally, to finish up the scene, I want to rename the static body 2D to billboard, and then save all of this. I want to save it inside of scenes. There we have objects, we already have the bed, and now I want to save the billboard in the same folder. And that is all we need for the first part of the exercise. So back in the level, with the level selected, I want to add another child node, which I can do either by clicking on the change symbol or with Control, Shift, and A. There we have our billboard. I can click on Open, and we have a billboard. You can also transform it inside of this level scene. All you have to do is go to Transform and then apply, for example, a rotation. Something like this. Now let's run the game. And there we have still our collision. This one is looking really good. The bed also works, so I am very happy with this. What is annoying me right now is that the bed is on top of the player. And this is because the bed comes after the player inside of the node tree. To fix that, I want to move the player below the bed inside of this node tree. If I now run this again, this is feeling significantly more realistic. Later on, we're going to work a bit more with the drawing order, but this is a much better start. With that, we have covered the first part of the exercise. I can also close the bed scene and the billboard scene. We don't delete them, we just close them in the editor. You can still access them later on. I prefer to have as few tabs open as possible, that way things are a bit cleaner to work with. Now, next up, we have to create the drone. And this one, since it is going to move, is going to be a character body 2D. Which means for the first node inside of the scene, I want to have a character body 2D. Once again, this character body 2D is going to need a sprite. The sprite we can find not inside of the objects, but rather inside of the enemies. There we have a drone, and this drone I want to move into the texture. That's all we need from the graphics folder. And next up, we have to add a collision shape. For that, I have the character body 2D selected, click on Ctrl A, and add a collision shape 2D. For this collision shape, I want to have a custom shape, which is going to be a circle shape. And if you now look very closely, we have a circle shape, and this I want to scale up to roughly capture the body of this drone. And once again with that, we have the basic setup. We have a physics body, an image, and a collision shape. With that, I can rename things. Let's call the parent a drone, and then save the entire scene. For all of this, I want to add another folder that I called enemies. Inside of this enemies folder, I want to have my drone. And now back inside of the level, I want to add, with the level node selected, my drone, which I have all the way at the top. And let's move the drone somewhere here so we can see it perfectly inside of the game. Cool. With that, we have a drone, and the collision with the player is still working. So that's a good start. To finish things up, we have to move this drone. And for that, inside of the drone is going to get a script. Meaning I want to attach a new script. It should be in the same folder as the drone, which it is right now. And for the basic setup, I want to have empty. I can click on Create, and there we go. We now have an empty script that is inheriting from a character body 2D. To move
How I can move this? In- It's not bad, but it doesn't collide with the bed and box. But I can't do move and slide on this. Can I? Let's see this. Actually, I can. Yeah. Let's see. I can copy this. I can copy this. I just need to. I think this is good enough. Yeah. Okay. That was easy. It is. Oh, I can move it. I can give my velocity to. Oh. That's why when I do Vampire Survivors tutorial, the slime. Yeah. The slime and the player glue to each other.
It, we have to do something roughly similar compared to the player, which means, first of all, we will need a process function. This one is quite easy, func underscore process. And we know already we're not going to use delta, so I'm going to add an underscore right away. Inside of this function, we now, first of all, need a direction, then we have to update the velocity, and then we have to call move and slide. The direction is the easiest because I want this drone simply to go to the right, at least for now. For that, I want to create a new variable, call it direction, like we have done for the player, except this one is just going to be a vector2 that has 1 and 0, which basically means we are going to the right. We could actually make this a bit more expressive because instead of 1 and 0, we can type dot and in all uppercase letters, right. The outcome is going to be the same. Now that we have that, we can update the velocity. We have to target the velocity property and then get the direction and multiply it with some kind of speed. For this one, let's go with 400. Finally, all we have to do is call move and slide, and we should be good to go. Let's run the game, and there we go. We get the drone moving, and also we have collisions with the player. Let's try all of this again so you can see a bit better. So if the drone is colliding with the player, it's trying to wiggle around it. I guess making the movement speed a bit lower to 100 is going to visualize all of this better. Now we have a very slow drone and the player can't stop it. So there's collision between these two objects. And if the player is simply blocking a part of it, then the drone slides along the player, which is what we're getting because we are using move and slide. And this was a super important lecture, so I'm going to finish it here. But definitely play around with this in your own time. It's really important to understand. Once again, to finish up this video, this kind of setup is fundamental to basically any kind of game in Godot. You have some kind of physics body, then an image, and then a collision shape. This is something you see all the time, and something I'm going to use a lot as well. For the next major part, we are going to create an area 2D. And to use an area 2D properly, we are also going to have to talk about signals. I'll cover that in just a second. First of all, though, a bit of a recap. Here is an overview of all of the collision body 2Ds. So far, we have used a static body 2D and we have used a character body 2D. Those two, I think at this point, should at least be somewhat doable. For this video, I want to work on an area 2D, which, as a reminder, is simply an area that can check if another body has entered. It can also check for other things, but I want to keep it simple for now. Ultimately, what we're going to build is an inside area entrance, and the area 2D is going to check if the player has entered this area. That being said, there is a problem we have to talk about. Right now, we can use an area 2D, but it would be pointless. It would simply be an invisible area that can't do anything. As a consequence, we have to learn about some extra functionality so that the area can actually do something. That functionality is called signals. And signals are incredibly important. Basically, what they are doing, when a certain action happens to a node, for example, a body entering an area, it could also be a timer running out or two bodies colliding and a whole host of other options. If that happens to a node, then the node can call a piece of code somewhere in your script. And this is called a signal. So essentially, whenever a certain action happens to a node, the node can trigger some code. That's basically all that's happening. This is also incredibly powerful to make nodes communicate with each other and make your game more interactive. Back in Godot, I want to start by cleaning things up a bit. Most importantly, I want to delete the drone, the billboard, and the bat, because we don't need them right now, and I want to have a bit of space. With that, the only node we have left is the player. Let's try the scene just to make sure that everything is still working, and that's looking pretty good. Cool. Once we have that, I want to build an entrance E area. This is going to transition us later from an outside level to an inside level. There is one graphic that contains all of that. This is inside of graphics. There we have objects, and in there we have a gate. I already had it selected. If I double click on it, you can see it's a simple entrance area. By the way, what you can also do, you can simply drag the node into Godot, and then it creates a sprite automatically. Can be quite nice, although I don't. Simple entrance. There we have objects, and in there we have a gate. I already had it selected. If I double click on it, you can see it's a simple entrance area. By the way, what you can also do, you can simply drag the node.
I don't have a gate. Dude. Come on, man. Behave gate.
Into Godot, and then it creates a sprite automatically. Can be quite nice, although I don't simple entrance area. By the way, what you can also do, you can simply drag the node into Godot, and then it creates a sprite automatically. Can be quite nice, although I don't use it too often. But basically what we have is an entrance area. What you do want to be aware of is that only this part of the area is supposed to be visible. If the player can see the area in the back, it's going to look a bit broken. But the idea is that all of this is collidable, and then in just a bit, we're going to add some walls or obstacles around these areas surrounding it. That way the player can never get to this back bit. For now, I want to move the entrance area a bit up, like so we can see it a bit better in our current scene. And later on, when we have the camera, all of this is going to be much more visible. But for now, don't worry too much about it. We need to see the entrance, this bit. So let me run the game. And there we can see we have an entrance area. Although it doesn't do anything right now because it is literally just an image. Also, I want to have this below the player so the player is on top of it. That's feeling a little bit better. Once again, don't worry too much about it for now. With that, we have an image, but there are two things we have to work on for now. Number one is we have to add the collisions for these parts here that are supposed to be collidable. As a matter of fact, if I scroll out a bit, I want to have a collision that goes roughly around here. Then we have a cutout for the entrance, and then we have the rest of the collidable area. For that, we have to learn about a new node, because now we have a more irregular collision shape. After we have that, we can add an area around this entrancey bit, and this is going to actually trigger an action if the player enters it. But that comes next. First of all, let's add a collision area. For that, with the level node selected, I'm going to add a new node, which once again is going to be a static body 2D, because this entire area is going to be a static body 2D. And this static body 2D is going to get the image as a child. And with that, I can also move all of that below the player. So we once again reestablish the drawing order, where the gate is below the player. This static body 2D now once again has a warning that we are going to need a collision shape. And there you can already see we have a collision shape 2D or a collision polygon 2D. So far, we used a collision shape. Now we are going to use a collision polygon 2D. Which means with the static body 2D selected, I'm going to click on the plus again, and I am going to type into the search collision polygon 2D. Then click on enter, and now we are getting another node. This node on the right side doesn't have a shape. Instead, what it has at the top, these three symbols. We have create points, we have edit points, and we have erase points. I'm going to start by selecting create points, and then you can simply draw points on all of this. And basically draw a shape that you want around this object. I am not going to be too precise for all of this. Let me do it like this and around here. Obviously, for an actual game, you do want to be somewhat precise here. And let me finish the shape like so. There you can see we have a for an actual game, you do want to be somewhat precise. Let me do it like a shape that you want around this object. I am not going to be too precise for all of this. Let me do it like this and around here. Obviously, for an actual game, you do want to be somewhat precise here. And let me finish the shape like so. There you can see we have a reasonable shape that covers the area. And if you want to update a point, you can simply click on it and move it around like so. That feels okay. And if I zoom in, you could be a lot more precise with all of this. Also, when you hover over a path between 2 points, you can see a plus and you can click on it and then move this point. So let me add a few more. And this isn't looking too terrible. At least in terms of the game, this should be working okay. So I can refine this a bit, but if you want to have a really nice collision mechanic for your game, you do want to spend some time on all of this. But in my case, I don't want to keep up the tutorial too long. All right. I think this is working quite well. Let's test it. And if I now move around, there is a collision. It's a bit hard to see since the gate takes up so much space, but it is definitely working. Nice. With that, I can rename the static body 2D to gate. That feels a bit better. And now we can work on the second part, the area 2D. With the gate selected, I am going to add another node with Control A, and I want to have an area 2D. This, once again, is not going to do anything, and we're getting a warning that we need to add a shape, like we have done for all of the other collision objects. And this has to be a child, so with the area 2D selected, I am going to press Control A again, and for this one, I want to have a collision shape 2D. So let's create it. We still can't see anything, we're getting another error that now we have to provide a shape. This we get on the right side in the inspector, shape, and for this one, I want to have a rectangle. And this rectangle we can now see here. So let me move it to the place where I want it to be, somewhere here, and let's move it to some area like this. I should probably make it a bit more narrow, and something like this is looking okay. I guess move it a bit further down. There we go. This is a roughly decent entrance. If I run the game, do anything. And well, the issue right now is that this area to area and simply invisible. To make it do signal, and signals you can see on the you get signals, and these are all of the signals that an area 2D could send out. The one we are going to use is called body entered. This is going to be triggered whenever a body, like a character body 2D, enters this area 2D. We could also check for another area entering or exiting. We could check if an area shape has entered. We could check for a whole range of other things. And these kind of signals are available for every node, although every node has different kinds of signals. For example, if we click on the player, we have signals, for example, for input or mouse entered or exited, but they are not as useful. If I click on the level, we get even fewer. For example, in there, we have a signal if the current node is ready, if it was renamed, if it entered the tree, or if it exited the tree, which means it was deleted, or, well, a couple of others, but they're not too important. Area 2D is one of the nodes that has most of the signals that you actually care about. To actually use a signal, you have to double click on it. So in my case, I want to have the body entered. I double click on it, and now we get another dialog. Essentially, what is going to happen? When this body entered is triggered, we are running a function somewhere. And this function we can only run when we have a script. So we have to connect this signal to some kind of code inside of this scene. Right now in the scene, we have two nodes with a script. We have the level and we have the player. I want to connect it to the level. which means with the level selected, you can see it, we have a script there. I want to click on connect. Although before I do that, you could also rename the function we are going to call, although you probably shouldn't. So let me just click on connect. And now we have a function inside of the level. So inside of this node, inside of the script of this node to be more specific, we have a function. And this function will be triggered whenever a body is entering the area 2D. On top of that, you can also see on the area 2D node, we have a symbol that says node has one connection, which basically means the node has one signal. Let's test this one. If this is the case, I want to print, let's say body has entered. And now if I run all of this, we already get body has entered. And if I go into this area a couple of times with the player, you can see we get body has entered multiple times. The reason why we are getting body entered by default is, well, the player is already inside of this area when the game is starting. That probably shouldn't be the case, so let me move the player a bit outside of it. Now if I run this again, we don't get any message by default, but if I move into this area, we get body has entered. And this I can do multiple times. Understanding signals is another super important part of Godot. So if you want to play around with these signals a bit more, I would definitely recommend you to do so. I guess I could add another one. For example, we could add body exited. This is the opposite of body entered. It's going to be triggered whenever a body exits an area. For that, I have to double click on it, and I have to once again connect it to some kind of script. This, once again, I want to do for the level. So now I click on connect again. And now we have another function inside of the level node. This one could, for example, print body has exited. Now, if I run the entire thing again, we get nothing by default. If I enter the area 2D, body has entered, and if I exit it, body has exited. I think if you play around with the system, it should be fairly straightforward. There isn't that much to it. I suppose one more thing that you should be aware of is that sometimes a signal gives you an argument. In this case, it is the body that has entered. You can see it because we have one argument that we get by default into this function. For example, we could print this body. And now if I run it again, we get body has entered and we get the player character node. Because this is the body that has entered this area 2D. So when we are printing the body, we are printing the player. Let me expand the right side a bit. Sometimes a node has a lot of arguments. For example, when we look for area entered, we can capture the area that has entered. Or if we look for area shape entered, there is a lot of extra arguments you get. You do want to be aware of them because sometimes they're really useful. Although in this case, we don't need them. Because of that, and you can already see it get, or printing the, we get to this function, is that now if I run the entire thing again, we get nothing by default. If I enter the area 2D, body has entered, and if I exit it, body has exited. We could add body exited. This is the opposite of body entered. It's going to be triggered whenever a body exits an area. For that, I have to double click on it, and I have to once again connect it to some kind of script. This, once again, I want to do for the level. So now I click on connect again. And now we have another function inside of the level node. This one could, for example, print body has exited. Now, if I run the entire thing again, we get nothing by default. If I enter the area 2D, body has entered, and if I exit it, body has exited. I think if you play around with the system, it should be fairly straightforward. There isn't that much to it. I suppose one more thing that you should be aware of is that sometimes a signal gives you an argument. In this case, it is the body that has entered. You can see it because we have one argument that we get by default into this function. For example, we could print this body. And now if I run it again, we get body has entered and we get the player character node. because this is the body that has entered this area 2D. So when we are printing the body, we are printing the player. Let me expand the right side a bit. Sometimes a node has a lot of arguments. For example, when we look for area entered, we can capture the area that has entered. Or if we look for area shape entered, there is a lot of extra arguments you get. You do want to be aware of them because sometimes they're really useful. Although in this case, we don't need them. Because of that, and you can already see it in the debugger, we have one warning that the parameter body is never used in the function, so Godot wants an underscore. Or at least it would very much recommend an underscore. So for that, I'm going to add an underscore to both of these functions and get rid of the print statement because we are not going to need it. With that, we have covered the basics of a signal. There's one other place where we are going to use it right away. That is going to be inside of the player. Right now, the player can shoot a laser and shoot a grenade whenever we are pressing the button. Let me demonstrate actually. I can click on the left mouse button and we're getting shoot laser as fast as I can click the button. Same with the grenade. If I right click, we're getting a grenade as fast as I can click. This is not what I want. Instead, I want to have a delay between shooting laser or shooting a grenade. And for that, I am going to add a bit more logic. All the way at the top, I'm going to add two variables. The first one is going to be called var can underscore laser. This one is going to be a boolean, which by default is going to be true. After that, I can press on Control or Command Shift and D and duplicate the entire line. I'm going to change can laser to can grenade, which is also going to be a boolean that by default is true. Both of these booleans I'm going to use inside of these two input statements. First of all, I am only going to allow the player to shoot a laser if the input action is true and can laser is also true. Same for the grenade. I want to check for the input and can grenade. Also, once again here, GDScript works like Python, where you don't have to add can laser is equal to true. If this value is true by itself, then GDScript is going to evaluate the entire thing to true. Inside of the function now, I want to set can laser to false and can grenade to false as well. If I run the game again, I can shoot exactly once. So if I left click, I can shoot once and not do it again. And if I right click, I can also shoot grenade once, but not again. That is because we can only do either of these things if can laser or can grenade is true, which it is not once we have done it once because we are setting it to false. Now we have to use a timer to reactivate both of these variables. And timers are simply another node. So with the player selected, I want to add another node, and this node is called a timer. A timer has a couple of parameters you can work with. We have a wait time. This is the length of the timer. Then we have one shot. This one tells the timer to only run once, and if it's deactivated, it will run continuously. Finally, we have auto start. This tells the timer to start automatically once it was created. Also, a timer has a couple of signals that you want to be aware of, although timeout is the one you really want to care about.
Okay.
Once we have all of that, we can do an exercise. I want you guys to set the timer duration to half a second, and the timer should be started once the laser is shot. For that, check out the methods of the timer. After you have that, once the timer finishes, can laser should be set back to true. And for all of that, we can do an exercise. I want you guys to set the timer duration to half a second, and the timer should be started once the laser is shot. For that, check out the methods of the timer. After you have that, once the timer finishes, can laser should. One difference now is that and for that, you want to use a signal. Finally, add another timer and do all of that again for the grenades. The one difference now is that the cooldown should be 2 seconds. Pause the video now, and first of all, for this timer, first of all, I want to get the look and shot. Although auto start should not be enabled because of the length of the timer. On top of that, since I only want this timer to run once, we want to enable one shot. Although auto start should not be enabled because we want this timer to only start once the player has shot a laser. Speaking of which, we have to look at some code because once all of this code here is run, we want to activate the timer. The method signal start of the node, I can click on connect, and now we have on timer timeout. Every half and trip, and this time be a good idea. Shot. So now it's going to happen. We'll use shoot laser, and now if I right click, we get shoot grenade. Grenade back
I
to
can remove this.
That should be all we need. So
And
now
set
I
this
can
one
still
shot.
use shoot laser, and now if I right click, we get shoot grenade. If I keep on pressing it, nothing is going to happen. The reason for that is inside of the input statement for the secondary action, we are not starting the timer for the grenade. That we can do quite easily. I need grenade reload timer and drag it in there and then start it. Now let's try this again. I can still use the laser and now shoot grenade should work every 2 seconds. And this is looking pretty good. Cool. With that, we have covered a really important part of Godot. Signals, especially for an area 2D or for a timer, is something you are going to use all the time. Another really important thing you can do with signals is create your own. And this sometimes is absolutely necessary. You can create your own signals, but why would you want to do that? The reason is that the major limitations of signals is that they can only work between nodes inside of the same scene. And triggering custom signals can really help you to communicate between scenes. We actually already have that problem to an extent. Let's have a look. Inside of our level scene, we currently have two main children. We have the player, this one is totally fine, and then we have the gate. The gate though, if I expand it, is quite extensive. Ideally, all of this should be a separate scene, but this we can't do right now because the area 2D node sends a signal that is being captured by the level. As a matter of fact, let's rebuild all of this and then we can see very well where the problem is. And for that, let me close the drone scene and I want to create a new scene. I want to add a static body 2D, which is going to be the gate. And this gate is going to be the same thing that we have done with all of these nodes. Which means, first of all, I want to add a sprite 2D, which is going to get the gate, like so. On top of that, I want to add a collision polygon 2D. That is going to get a couple of area, a rectangle area 2D scenes. And also inside of the level, I want to get rid of both of these functions because the node sending the signal doesn't exist anymore. Instead, with the level selected, I want to attach the gate, which I can do by selecting the scene, and there we go. Now we have functionally the same outcome. Although, if I run the game, we don't have any kind of signal once the player enters this area 2D. Also, I want the gate to be below the player, so it looks a little bit less bad. The major issue is, with the area 2D selected, I can click on node, and I want to run some code if a body has entered this area 2D. But if I now click on it, I cannot select any node outside of the scene, which is a problem because I have to connect the code to this level script. And this is really important because the level is going to organize the entirety of the game. So it needs to have the information if the player has entered or not. We couldn't keep that logic organized inside of the scene. It just needs to be available in more spaces. And to make all of this work, we have to send a custom signal. This custom signal we're going to create inside of the gate. Or more specifically, the root node of the scene. This is going to get a script, so objects and gate. The folder is perfectly fine. And now we have a script attached to the gate. I don't need any of the inbuilt functions. Instead, what I want to do, first of all, this area 2D is going to now be connected to this script. So body entered. And now, since gate has a script, I can connect a signal. So on area 2D body entered, I can now once again print body has entered. This would also work. So if I run all of this, I can run into it, and now a body has entered. So this is still working. The issue now is that this information I need to know inside of my level script. And to make that work, we have to create a custom signal. This is actually quite easy, and it works somewhat similar compared to creating a variable. The keyword to create a signal is called signal. Next up, we have to give it a name. Let's call it player entered gate. And once you entered these two keywords, the word signal and then a name for your signal, back in the level, you can select the scene, and under node, you now have player entered gate. And you can see at the top, this is because inside of gate.gd, we now have this signal. This is a custom signal. You can see at the tabs where a signal is coming from. For example, some signals are connected to a node, other signals are connected to a canvas item, and some are connected to a collision object 2D. But in this case, we have a script, and this is where this signal is coming from. And this signal you can use like any other signal. So I can double click on it and now connect it to the level. And now we get on gate player entered gate. The naming here isn't ideal, but well, you get the idea. If we are triggering this signal, I now want to print player has entered gate. There's one more thing that we need though, and that is inside of gate.gd. We have created a signal, but now we have to trigger this signal. Or more specifically, the keyword here is called we have to emit the signal. That is because this function right now can only capture a signal, but it doesn't know when the signal is being triggered. And this we can do quite easily because we know when the body has entered the area 2D, then we want to trigger this signal. And this means instead of the print statement, I want to get player entered gate and then emit this signal. And don't forget to call it. And now, if I run all of this again, we get back to player has entered the gate. This is run inside of the level. There we have player has entered the gate. Now the logic for all of this can be a bit confusing. So let's go through it one by one. We start inside of the area 2D node, and this one has one signal attached, body entered. If this one is triggered, we have some code inside of the parent node, which is gate. If it is triggered, the function is this one, on area 2D body entered. This is the signal attached to this area 2D. If we are emitting this signal, we are emitting our own custom signal. And this custom signal we are capturing inside of the level where it is now being emitted from the parent node, so the gate, and the result is going to be captured inside of the function onGatePlayerEnteredGate. Now, this is something you absolutely want to practice. Although, before we get to that, inside of the gate, we don't need the body anymore because we assume that the body entering is going to be the player. But while we are here, you can add an extra argument or extra arguments into your own custom signals as well. All you have to do for that is add parentheses and then the argument you want to add. For example, in this case, this could simply be a body. And then when you are emitting a signal, you can simply pass the body in there. And then after you have that, inside of the level, you need a parameter to capture this body. Let's call it body as well. And then you can print the body and you should be good to go. Let's try all of that. And now we get player has entered the gate and player character body 2D, whatever we have in there. I would very much recommend you to play around with this in your own time. It is really important to understand custom signals because they allow you to make scenes emit signals as well. And that way, you can get a signal from inside of a scene and then work with this across multiple scenes. And the exercise I want you guys to do is make the player emit a custom signal called laser when the laser input is detected. And then inside of the level scene, I want you guys to capture all of that and print laser from level. Finally, do all of that with the grenades as well. Pause the video now and try to figure this one out.
Yeah. Finish this exercise and call it a day. Oh. There. There. Okay.
I want to create a if and we get the laser signal with that just to get rid of shoot laser because we don't need that anymore. That the other signal also works perfectly well. We are next up, all we have to do back inside of the player, I want to create another signal. I want to get side of the level. So back inside of the level scene, I now have another signal that I want to connect to the level. And this one is going to print grenade from level. All of that I can run now. I can left click, I get laser. I can right click, I get grenade every 2 seconds. And I can move around and I get player has entered the gate. This is all we needed.
Yeah.
And with that, we also have made huge progress to connect different nodes across different scenes, which is incredibly important. This level scene now, it feels significantly cleaner, where we have one node for the gate and one node for the player. Earlier, we had all of this stuff here inside of the level scene. And if you did that for hundreds of objects, it would be incredibly difficult to manage. The next major aspect I want to work on is to create custom scenes in code.
We stop in here. Night, everybody. Tomorrow, I hope I will continue. If I miss the tomorrow's stream, I will do a Sunday stream. But I never go down 3 stream a week. Except breaks, of course.